I found myself wondering what glasses would you wear today? Because I saw so many pictures of you, and every picture of you and every video on YouTube I watched of you, you had different glasses. So I'm like, oh, she likes funky glasses.
That's right.
Yeah. So my first question.
I thought you were asking me about the glasses. You want me to talk about the
Oh
glasses?
yeah. Okay, tell me about the glasses.
So I think it's very important for all people, but certainly people with disabilities, to engage intentionally in what I call dignity maintenance or dignity management strategies. So for somebody like me, in order to be understood by the people I am out in the public world with,
Yeah.
I want people to understand me the way I want to be understood. And so part of that is our uniforms or our costuming. So for me, glasses are really important because in terms of dignity maintenance, they do several things. First of all, they make me look more like, or they make me look like the educator that I want to look like.
Yeah.
And they also do the work for me of saying, look at my mouth, look at my face, stop staring at my hands.
Yeah.
And of course, my hands are very unusual. And so in terms of kind of choreographing my place in the world and teaching people who I am and how I want them to think of me and thus treat me, my glasses are part of the whole suite of dignity maintenance strategies I put together. Thank you very much for asking.
Well, that's exactly why I wear my crazy earrings. These aren't too crazy.
Oh, earrings do the same thing. Yeah.
Yes. So
I was noticing I really like that very fashionable pink that is everywhere now.
yes, well, I have my colors on, and somebody said this color looks good on me, so I decided to wear it today. Okay, so my first question: how has our perception of disability changed over the last 10 or 20 years, if at all?
Well, I think it's changed a great deal. And I'm not entirely sure what we might mean by our, but
I mean, the general public.
yeah, I think that it's the best time in all of human history to be a person with a disability in one of the rich nations that has good disability legislation and good services and health care available for people with disabilities. Now, I know that in at least the United States, people with disabilities are more represented in the poverty sector. I know that unemployment is highest for people with disabilities. Nonetheless, the work of the disability desegregation policies and laws and the disability integration policies and laws and the rebuilding and redesign of the shared, built, and designed public environment has increased quality of life for people with disabilities tremendously. For example, before, I don't know, let me just say 1968, or maybe even 1975, or maybe even 1980, people like you and me would not be in this place. We would not be on this campus because either we couldn't get in the door, or we had segregated education, or we were discriminated against without knowing that we were being discriminated against, or public transportation wasn't available to us, or attitudes in our family and amongst our associates were so negative to disability that we would not have been able to enter into employment, education, to have access to the resources that anybody needs to make a life of flourishing. So it's a terrific time to be a person with a disability if you know how to access the benefits, public benefits of living in a place that supports disability integration and disability justice.
A lot of people don't take advantage of what is offered because it seems like too much work to fight for it. But,
right. I'm not at all suggesting that it's easy to
Right.
access these benefits, but awareness about it is key.
Yes. I have another question about universal design. What do you think the most practical approach to achieving universal design, if you will, for our communities is going to be? How can we get people to realize it's not just for people with disabilities? It works for everybody.
That's right.
Right. So,
for people with disabilities, I think the most important thing is to persist and insist.
mm-hmm.
When we run up against a barrier, and I like to use that language, a barrier, whatever that barrier is, whether it's an attitudinal barrier, whether it is a digital barrier, there are more and more digital barriers that we're running into, or whether it's a barrier in the material world, like a stairway or a push door that doesn't work, push button that doesn't work, or a place where accessible design has failed in some way. To address that, and as I said, persist and insist, and to understand that we have the right as well as the obligation to do that. And it can be exhausting and dispiriting, of course.
Yeah.
The other aspect, of course, is to find community and to establish solidarity. And those are the responsibilities of individuals with disabilities, but it's the responsibility of all institutions, especially educational institutions, to make that knowledge and to available to everybody, and to make those avenues of access available to everybody, to do a lot of consciousness raising about disability justice, disability inclusion, disability access, and how the world is better for everybody when there is more inclusion and more diversity. I really like the concept of DEI now, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that's a nice string of aspirational terms, right? That rolls off the tongue of people, DEI. And I'm thinking, this sounds great to me. And to really hold DEI and all of the support there is for that accountable, as we like to say now, for creating diversity, equity, and inclusion for, by, and with people with disabilities.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Do you find it unusual or does it aggravate you that now that we're in the middle of the pandemic, all of a sudden, I'm sorry, they take a pandemic like the coronavirus to have people understand accommodations and like for instance, I'm better giving you a story. Like for instance, I used to ask people, can I attend this meeting by Zoom? And people would look at me like I had 3 heads. And then they'd go, oh no, we don't have that technology. But now that everybody needs it because of COVID-19, all of a sudden, everybody gets accommodations. And these are things that people with disabilities have been fighting for like all their lives. Accommodations in the workplace, the profound loneliness of being separated, technology that works, and just in general more flexibility in the workplace. Now all these things are happening because everybody needs it.
Right.
And this kind of aggravates me. I wonder if you have some thoughts. So in that sense, I think in that one sense that the pandemic has been very helpful, as far as accommodations are concerned. I think the pandemic has moved that thought process along. So,
I think what's probably this is what you're saying, what's most important, the most important lesson, I guess, that has come out of our pandemic experience in terms of technology use for everybody, but technology use for people with disabilities, is to remind us that technology both is the solution and the barrier at the same time.
it is.
And
I definitely agree with that.
it has presented to us a new case study. For example, as you said, many of us who have been requesting using some kind of video technology, like at professional conferences
Right.
in my field, it was understood that one could not attend a professional conference like the Modern Language Association conference, which is the professional organization for English and teachers of language. You
Right.
could not have, we didn't call it Zoom because they didn't have it, you could not have Skyped in
Yes,
as an
right.
accommodation because they were refusing to let people do it for 2 reasons. One is they didn't have the technology and it cost too much. And the other one was that they wanted everyone to be there in person because it was understood that if you came in by Skype, you would not attend the conference. And so it was understood as a kind of compromised way. And they were afraid that if they allowed some people to attend the conference by Skype, then everybody would, and people wouldn't come to the conferences. So it was a big
Right.
no, 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 no.
Yes.
So then things changed. And when the pandemic came, what we suddenly had was a new understanding of what participation might be, because we all had to be together virtually or through technology to do our work together. And one of the things that I saw happening in the pandemic was that there was this great enthusiasm for this new mode of professional engagement that was understood as so much better for people with disabilities. And in some ways, and for some people, and in some circumstances, virtual or Zoom participation is so much better. But at the same time, it also creates completely unexpected barriers for people with disabilities. For example, I've had many conversations with my blind colleagues, my deaf colleagues, and of course my other colleagues, many of my other colleagues who have mobility disabilities and don't, what I say, don't keyboard or don't manipulate a computer.
Yeah,
and there are huge barriers that are built in to the Zoom platform that people are trying to fix, but they're still in there. And it's very difficult to acquaint people with how these barriers work, and we don't know what they are. I was pretty used to being able to manage my technological environment when I could go to my office and teach in person, but suddenly when I'm living in this complete virtual world, I don't know how to manage any of this stuff. And I don't have the technology for it, and I don't get the support for it. And my worry is this business about, oh, this is so much better for people with disabilities, and it'll save us so much money, and that's my worry.
I can see that, but I can also see that I have been able to attend so many more meetings than I haven't had to worry about transportation or anything like that.
Exactly. And so it cuts both ways.
Yes, it cuts both ways. Moving on, I was wondering how you feel about the struggle or the tension between person-first language and identity-first language. And how is somebody outside of the disability community supposed to know what to say when?
The way I like to talk about this question is to say that there are two elements. One is that there's a long history of what I call the cultural work of self-naming for minority groups, or what we might call protected groups. So we kind of know that history of the politics and culture of self-naming in relation to, let's say, Black with a capital B people in America now. We could go back to the early 1920s when W.E.B. Du Bois announced the concept of the new Negro and was talking about what I call the politics of self-naming. And this was imagined as a progressive way to engage in the political struggle, if you will, of self-naming. And of course, there's a long history that we can trace quite easily with African American, with Black, with the new Negro, with Black with a small b, Black with a capital B. And we can think about the dynamics of community and knowledge making and these waves of self-naming. And I think it's important to then be able to trace that in relation to other groups, women, and particularly people with disabilities. And so to talk about not what you should and shouldn't call people now, because that makes people nervous, especially around disability. That's like, I don't know how to talk about you. I don't know what I ought to be saying. And so I think that it's our responsibility to be as generous as we can with other people, and to say things like, how would you like to be addressed?
Yes.
Or to say things like, this is how I'd like you to, to talk about me, to help people out, but also to be very aware that this is a dynamic process and that language does its work.
Yes.
And you think about, and to think about what kind of work does language do? What kind of meaning making is created by certain language and certain kinds of words. I'm very pedantic about this, by the way.
Yeah.
And also for us to make other people feel comfortable instead of nervous. I feel that that's an important piece of political work.
For me, my feelings about language and how people address or speak about me, that has evolved. First of all, I always tell people use people first language. Kathy is a woman with a disability. But now I just try to tell people don't use language that carries with it assumptions, like Kathy is confined to a wheelchair.
Confined is a terrible term.
Because I'm horseback, I can ride a horse. I'm not confined to this wheelchair because this technology, this wheelchair is my wings. Without it, then I would be confined.
Exactly.
And that's what I explain to people all the time. Oh, and another one I hate is Kathy or somebody suffers from whatever.
I know.
And
suffers and afflicted, those are difficult words. And it's very important for us to, in my view, sort of gently and graciously correct people by giving them language that works better rather than saying don't say this or don't say that. I mean, your explanation of
being combined,
of how you use your wheelchair. There was a term I ran into a few years ago that I just love, and I like to use it a lot in teaching, and that is to think about, I have an image that I show, to think about people who use wheelchairs as wheelchair wearers.
Oh, cool.
Which I thought, it's a term that can kind of interrupt the way we think about how we use our technology, and to think about us as agents. These technologies are things that we wear, that we are in charge of. They don't run us, we run them.
Right, yes, you're right, thank you. I was told by a 10-year-old once. I mean, I was in a bookstore at my college, and I was looking for a book and I couldn't find it, so I really wasn't paying attention to my surroundings. And this little girl comes up to me and she said, "You have CP?" And I said, "Yes, I do. How did you know?" And she goes, "Oh, I have it too." And I'm like looking at her and I can't quite see it. So I said, "Where?" And she goes, "See, look at my hands." And I said, "Oh yeah, I guess you do have it." And then she said something that was quite surprising to me. She said, "Oh, you're so lucky you're in that wheelchair." and she could walk, you know, she was walking with a limp and stuff, and I said, what do you mean I'm lucky? You can do almost everything. And she said, well, when you need help, people know it right away.
Yeah.
But when I'm in the lunchroom and I drop my tray, all the kids laughing, I just get yelled at. And, you know, she goes, I just get yelled at. And so you're lucky because people know that you need help and help you right away. So, my question has to do with how do we best support the idea of invisible disabilities and help the community understand invisible disabilities better.
This is such an important question, and it relates to what I was saying about my glasses, in my view.
Yes.
And that is that one of the things as people with disabilities we need to learn how to do, and this we can learn how to do this in our families, we can learn how to do this in school, we can learn how to do this through our healthcare system, and that is to manage our own images in some way, which is a matter of managing our own technologies, but it's also a matter of what the term that I like that I used, I hope I used it, dignity maintenance. Yeah. And part of that is to, in my view, to sort of break down this idea about visible and invisible disabilities, but rather to talk about what I like to call legibility. Remember, I'm an English teacher. So what I like to do is to imagine that in social circumstances, we, meaning people, read each other. And we then determine how to be with each other based on how we read each other. So it's important to make ourselves legible to one another in the way that we want to. So your friend was saying, which I think is really your new friend in the bookstore, what she was saying is, she didn't say it like this because this is pretentious, but what she was saying to you is that it's an advantage to have a wheelchair, not just because it makes the environment more accessible to you, but because it makes you more legible. And when you're legible, people understand who you are better and how they might relate to you more effectively. And I think that's a really interesting way for us to think about how we want to signal in what we do, how we talk about ourselves, how we dress, what kind of glasses we have, how pink our sweaters are, how we want to signal to other people who we are and how they want to treat us.
I never really thought about it in terms of legibility. I think a lot of times then we think about or we try to make ourselves less legible as people with disabilities. I mean, because, you know, like on paper, if we were talking about developmental age, for instance, and we look at all the things, when we talk about developmental age, what we usually mean is what physical things a person can do. So like skipping, like toileting, like any of those things. So on paper, my developmental age is probably going over, it's probably like, you know, a very young child, like 2, maybe. But if you look at me as a person and everything that I can do, and all my life experiences, college, marriage, all that stuff, then I'm a whole person. I'm an adult, but, you know, so it depends on what you see on paper,
Oh, right.
right?
I mean, these kinds of thresholds that are basically diagnostic thresholds,
Right.
you know, or quantitative measurement thresholds may have some utility somewhere in the world, but I don't know that they help human beings actually live a life.
Right, right.
I mean, I think it's terrible to imagine a measurement or a description of someone's capability to say, as a 2-year-old, or that you have the capacity of a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old. That kind of quantification of human experience seems, maybe it has some utility in, I don't know, clinical settings, but man, I don't know that it has any utility in.
But really, doesn't it aggravate you that, you know, it's like, how many times do you have to I hear someone say, oh, he has the mind, he's 25, but he has the mind of a 5-year-old. I hate that.
Yeah, that's what I mean, that sort of quantification of human complexity is not helpful.
No, it isn't.
Although I understand that that quantification of human experience and capacity is necessary sometimes to access resources.
Right.
But what we need to figure out how to do is to sort of bracket that. That's not who you are, that's just what I have to do in order to access the resources that I need to flourish. Mm-hmm. But trying to separate those two things is hard sometimes.
I noticed that you use the word flourish a lot in all your speeches. I watched a lot of things on YouTube, and in your writing, you use the word flourish. Could you explain that?
Sure. So I'm an English teacher, remember? Yes. That's what I've always done. And 5 or 6 years ago, I decided that I wanted to expand my academic, we call it areas of expertise, into bioethics. Because bioethics is an applied field. And I wanted to start thinking not so much in terms of theory, critical theory, let's say, which is what I was doing in critical theory and literary studies, but to try to think about application of theory in policy and practice, specifically in medical science, which of course I know nothing about. But bioethics is a field composed of, it's an interdisciplinary field, it's an applied field, it's relatively new, it's not like philology and biology. It's relatively new, and it's interdisciplinary, made up of philosophy, religious studies, and medical science.
Really?
Yeah, strange bedfellows there.
Yeah.
And so what I discovered was that there were vocabularies that came from those fields that I hadn't been using. I would say in all of my work, I had probably never used the word moral. Maybe we used to talk years ago about what's the moral of the story, but that went out of fashion in literary studies a long time ago. But in religious studies, we use the term moral a lot. So I started using the word moral. In theology, moral is used a lot, moral theology. So there is a term that is very broadly used in philosophy, and that is the word flourishing. And I thought, I think this word is swell. I'm going to start using it all the time.
Yes,
because one of the pieces of vocabulary that's often used in bioethics in a different more in medical science, and that is the idea of quality of life. And so I want to take the idea of flourishing from philosophy, pluck that right out, and put that into the conversation about high and low quality of life that is used to judge people with disabilities. So part of that is what I do as an English teacher, and that is mobilize vocabulary, be attentive to the cultural work and the meaning-making work of language and words, and to think about what those vectors of representation, words, pictures, images, what they do, what they make in the world. And that's what I'm trying to bring into the enterprise we call bioethics. So that's why I say flourishing.
Yes, I decided I like that word too.
Thank you. It's my gift to you, dear.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate it. Now I'm going to switch gears because I really want to hear your perspective on this. In the disability community, there is so much siloing, like particularly between people with physical disabilities and people with cognitive or intellectual disabilities. You know, and the way I look at it, it's like we have so many of the same needs that if we were together, like if we all, like, you know, I read once that if we all voted, we could change the course of the election and get what everybody needs. You know, so can I have your thoughts on this?
Yes.
What can we do to change that?
Right. As you know, people with disabilities is a politically, socially, and historically constituted category that comes through national and state laws and legislation and practices. And most people with disabilities are not in families or communities of people who are like them. For example, I grew up in a family where nobody else even knew or thought or talked about disability, nor did I. I didn't think I knew anybody with a disability. I didn't have any disability community. There was none of this available to me. It was only later in life through my sector, if you will, which is, I'm a teacher, right? So that's where I did my work. That's where my community was constituted. I didn't have the time or the energy to be anywhere else. And so I composed the community, my disability community, from the people at hand. And therefore, the community that I made was made up of certain kinds of people with disabilities. Therefore, people with cognitive disabilities or developmental disabilities, I didn't have much opportunity to be in community with, nor was I ever in community with like, I don't know what you call it, but like diagnostic communities. I mean, there's a great deal of solidarity around, like, you know, cerebral palsy. Or I have a friend with cystic fibrosis, and she talks about the CF people because she's in organizations and communities that are specifically based on diagnostic categories. I didn't ever have any of that.
Right.
So I think the thing is, people are in literal spaces which allow them to form different kinds of community bonds, cross-disability bonds, that have a lot to do with kind of where you are and where you do your work in the world. And so that structures how and where we can do our work, make our communities, and just kind of live, you know?
So I have one more question, and I really would like to hear what you think about this. I understand our history, and I understand, you know, all of the ADA and all the legislation that it's taken to get where we are, but there's this disability pride, and I hope you don't think this is a rude question, but I'm not sure what we should be proud of. Do you have any thoughts about this? I mean, I am proud of myself in some ways individually, but as a group, I guess we've been doing a lot, but it also feels like, you know, just part of life, because we are a minority, even though we are the largest minority, as you've said in many of your talks and books and things. You know, so what do you think we should be proud of?
I am very intentional about strategy. So what I like to do, and I think I've kind of suggested this, is that I like to be able to pluck what's out there, what's at hand, and use it effectively. This comes from kind of rhetoric, if you will, that's one of my fields, rhetoric, right?
Right.
I mean, so the idea of pride, it's a word, it's a concept.
Right.
And it can serve us well in some respects, and it can be detrimental, or it can even be damaging in some respects. So I think when we think about kind of conceptual and linguistic strategies, what we want to do is we want to think about like what the word disability does, what the word crip does. I don't have much taste for the word crip because it's a little too close to the quick for me.
Right.
But you know, I know a lot of people that like to call each other crips, and I know that there's a lot of utility in the movement around crip theory. And my thought is, it's not a matter of whether this is right or wrong. It's a matter of thinking about what, like a term like crip might do, who might use it, how it might form community, how it might build knowledge, how it might get something done. And I feel that same way about pride. So pride's out there. We know about gay pride. We know about a lot of pride movements. And I think we can think about kind of getting it and strategically mobilizing it for when we want to use it. I do think that there are important conversations about so-called inspiration, and there's a new term out there, inspiration porn, which is a term that I kind of like and I kind of don't like because it's sassy. But it's also negative because in some ways I do think people I know with disabilities are inspiring, and sometimes I'd like to be thought of as inspirational. But on the other hand, when that is used as in a way that is negative or can be harmful, then you want to be able to get out of that script in some way. And so I think that the most important, and this is the English teacher in me, the most important thing for us all to do is to be very aware of how we, you know, can think of language as a buffet line. You know, we got a tray and somebody who's holding that tray, and we can say, I want to take that and put that on my tray for today, and I'll do something with that, and then I'll, you know, when I'm done with that, I'll get something else, and make the language work for us.
Oh, sorry.
No, same thing with flourishing, yeah.
Like you did
Get
with
the right word for the right work.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for meeting with me.
Thank you, Kathy.
It was very enlightening. I appreciate your time.
I appreciate your questions and your friendship, and I'm glad we're colleagues now.
Yes, that's great.